Some people walk into a room and the atmosphere subtly shifts. No announcement is made. No authority is declared. And yet, conversations slow. Eyes turn. Bodies adjust their posture almost instinctively. Nothing visible has happened, but something has been decided. Others enter the same room with equal intelligence, equal competence, even equal morality. And nothing happens at all. They speak, but their words land softly. They contribute, but are overlooked. They exist, but do not register. This difference is not luck, and it is not fairness. From an early age, we are taught a comforting story about respect. We are told that if we are kind, honest, hardworking, and morally upright, respect will naturally follow. That respect is a reward for virtue, a social echo of goodness. But experience quietly contradicts this lesson. We have all seen those who bend rules, manipulate narratives, and violate moral expectations, yet command immense respect. And we have seen those who do everything right and are still dismissed, ignored, or spoken over. So a question begins to form. Not loudly, not comfortably, but persistently, is respect truly earned? Or is it engineered? Across history, entire empires have risen and fallen based not on righteousness, but perception. Kings ruled not because they were good, but because they were believed to be inevitable. Generals inspired loyalty not through kindness, but through an aura of certainty. Revolutionaries didn't convince masses through logic alone, but by shaping how power felt. Respect, it seems, has always obeyed rules that were never written down, long before psychology textbooks or leadership seminars. Human beings were already responding to subtle signals. Confidence mistaken for competence. Silence mistaken for depth. Restraint mistaken for strength. These patterns were observed, refined, and quietly exploited by those who paid close attention, and those who didn't paid the price, because respect is not simply a social courtesy. It is a form of power. It determines who is heard and who is ignored, who is followed and who is replaced, who is protected and who is sacrificed when conditions change. Respect decides whose mistakes are forgiven, whose are fatal. Yet, despite its influence, we rarely speak about how respect actually works. We moralize it. We romanticize it. We pretend it emerges naturally in fair systems. Because to admit the truth that respect can be manufactured feels unsettling, even dangerous if respect can be engineered. Then the social world is not governed by justice alone, but by psychological leverage, by impressions, by fear, by expectation, and those who understand this do not rush to explain it, because knowledge of these mechanisms creates asymmetry. Once you see how respect is formed, you can shape it. And once you can shape it, you gain an advantage over those who still believe it is accidental throughout history. The most effective wielders of power were rarely the most virtuous. They were the most observant. They studied human nature without sentiment. They accepted uncomfortable truths about fear, admiration, and obedience. And they used that knowledge not to become liked, but to become untouchable. This is why the rules of respect are rarely spoken aloud. They are passed indirectly, through behavior rather than instruction, through outcomes rather than explanations, through silence, because respect, at its core, is not a moral virtue. It is a psychological response, and like all psychological responses, it can be triggered. What follows is not a guide to becoming admired. It is not a lesson in ethics or self-help. It is an examination of how respect has actually been commanded across centuries, cultures, and systems of power. The uncomfortable reality is this: those who master these rules often shape the world, while those who ignore them live within boundaries they did not choose. And long before the modern age, one man articulated these truths with ruthless clarity, not as a villain, not as a cynic, but as a diagnostician of human nature. To understand respect, we must first understand him. Niccolò Machiavelli is one of the most misunderstood figures in intellectual history. His name has become shorthand for cruelty, manipulation, and moral corruption. To call someone Machiavellian is to accuse them of being cold, calculating, and ruthless. And yet, this reputation says less about Machiavelli himself and more about our discomfort with what he revealed. Machiavelli did not set out to teach people how to become evil. He set out to describe how power actually operates once comforting stories are stripped away. He wrote in an era where illusions were lethal. Renaissance Italy was not a world of stability or justice. It was a fragmented landscape of city-states constantly at war, governed by fragile alliances, sudden betrayals, and shifting loyalties. Florence, Machiavelli's home, oscillated between republic and tyranny, between idealism and bloodshed. Leaders rose quickly and fell violently. Mercy was admired in theory and punished in practice. Good intentions offered no protection against knives in the dark. It was in this environment that Machiavelli learned his most dangerous lesson. Reality does not reward moral purity. It rewards those who understand human behavior. As a diplomat, Machiavelli observed princes, generals, and popes at close range. He watched men speak of virtue while plotting treachery. He saw alliances formed not by trust, but by necessity. He noticed that leaders who relied on being loved were abandoned the moment circumstances shifted, while those who inspired fear or awe endured. Machiavelli did not invent these dynamics. He documented them. And that distinction matters. What made his work so unsettling was not its cruelty, but its honesty. He refused to describe humans as they wished to be seen. He described them as they behaved when power, survival, and status were at stake. In doing so, he violated an unspoken social agreement that power should pretend to be moral, even when it is not. This is why Machiavelli still haunts the modern world, not because we live in darker times, but because we live in psychologically identical ones. Strip away the crowns and armor, and the same instincts remain. Corporate boardrooms replace royal courts. Social media replaces public squares. Influence replaces armies. But the human mind responds to the same signals it always has: confidence, dominance, uncertainty, control. People still follow those who appear decisive. They still submit to those who seem unshakable. They still distrust weakness, even while claiming to value empathy. And they still punish those who mistake idealism for leverage. Machiavelli understood something uncomfortable. Societies change, technologies evolve, but human nature is remarkably stable. We are still driven by fear of loss, desire for status, and hunger for security. We still confuse appearance with essence. We still reward those who manage perception better than those who embody truth. This is why Machiavelli's ideas resurface whenever systems become unstable. In times of comfort, morality feels sufficient. In times of pressure, psychology takes over. And it is crucial to understand this. Machiavelli was not prescribing how the world should be. He was explaining how it already was. His observations were not moral commandments. They were psychological laws. Laws that operate whether or not we approve of them. Ignoring gravity does not make you virtuous, it makes you vulnerable. The same is true of power. To reject Machiavelli on moral grounds is easy. To ignore him is dangerous, because those who understand these laws do not disappear. They rise quietly. They shape outcomes while others argue about intentions. They command respect, not by demanding it, but by structuring reality so that resistance feels costly. And perhaps most unsettling of all, Machiavelli never presented his ideas as a neat list of rules. He embedded them in stories, in historical analysis, in subtle warnings. The patterns are there, but they must be extracted. When distilled, they form something far more enduring than political advice. They form a blueprint for how respect is commanded not through virtue alone, but through mastery of perception, fear, and human expectation. These are the unspoken rules. Asterisk. The first rule of commanding respect is also the most counterintuitive. The more you seek it, the further it moves away from you. Human beings are exquisitely sensitive to signals of need. Long before we consciously evaluate words or credentials, we register emotional posture. We sense who is comfortable in their position and who is quietly asking for permission to exist. This is not cruelty. It is instinct. Across social species, status flows away from desperation. The individual who appears to need approval is subconsciously ranked lower. Not because they lack value, but because dependence signals vulnerability. And vulnerability, in the language of power, invites control. Machiavelli understood this centuries ago. He observed that rulers who constantly sought the affection of their people weakened their authority. Not because affection is bad, but because chasing it reveals fear of losing it. A prince who needs to be loved has already surrendered leverage to those whose love he seeks. Modern psychology confirms this dynamic. Studies on status perception show that eagerness is often interpreted as incompetence, while restraint is interpreted as confidence. The mind equates emotional self-sufficiency with strength, even when logic suggests otherwise. We see this pattern everywhere. Leaders who over-explain their decisions appear uncertain. Managers who constantly justify their authority invite challenge. Public figures who rush to clarify every criticism signal that they are shaken by judgment. In trying to appear transparent, they erode their own credibility. On a personal level, the same rule applies. The individual who constantly seeks validation, who overtexts, overshares, over-apologizes, intentionally communicates a lack of inner stability. Their neediness becomes their defining trait, eclipsing their competence. This is where status inversion occurs. The more someone tries to secure respect through effort, the less it is granted. The less someone appears to need it, the more it gravitates toward them. This does not mean indifference. It means containment. Those who command respect are not emotionally absent. They are emotionally sovereign. Their sense of worth is not outsourced to the reactions of others. They speak without scanning the room for approval. They act without rehearsing how they will be perceived. This is why silence often elevates status. Silence suggests that one's position does not require defense. That explanation is optional, not necessary. Machiavelli's insight here was not about arrogance, but independence. To depend on approval is to give others power over your self-concept. And power, once given, is rarely returned willingly. Confidence, then, is not loudness. It is not domination. It is the quiet refusal to beg for recognition. In a world that is drawn to scarcity, emotional independence becomes magnetic. Those who do not ask to be respected are often the ones who are. The moment you meet someone, something irreversible begins. Before a word is fully processed, before intentions are evaluated, the mind quietly reaches a conclusion. Not a detailed one, a rough outline, a category, strong or weak, leader or follower, threat or asset. And once this outline is drawn, it hardens faster than most people realize. Machiavelli understood that power is rarely lost in dramatic moments. It is often lost in the opening seconds, when expectations are set and never revised. The first impression is not a surface detail. It is a psychological contract. Human beings are not efficient truth seekers. They are efficient pattern keepers. Once an initial judgment is formed, the mind resists updating it, not because it is accurate, but because it is convenient. To reconsider requires effort. To maintain requires inertia. This is why early displays of strength echo for years, and early displays of weakness linger long after they are no longer true. History is filled with figures who learned this too late. Leaders who hesitated at the beginning of their rule spent their entire reign trying to recover authority that never fully returned. Commanders who appeared uncertain in their first campaign were questioned even after later victories. The label had already been applied in modern life. The pattern is identical. The colleague who is too accommodating in the first meeting becomes the support role indefinitely. The manager who avoids confrontation early on becomes the one whose decisions are tested. The public figure who begins by apologizing is forever expected to. These outcomes feel unfair because they are not about capability. They are about narrative momentum. Psychologically, first impressions anchor future interpretation. Every action afterward is filtered through that initial lens. Strength is reframed as aggression. Confidence as compensation. Competence as luck. The person is no longer evaluated. Freely, they are interpreted. This is why passivity at the beginning of any relationship is not neutral. It is not humility. It is not patience. It is a decision to let others write the opening chapter of your story. Machiavelli warned that those who fail to assert their presence early invite containment later. Once expectations settle, resistance becomes costly. To break out of an assigned role feels disruptive not because it is wrong, but because it violates psychological comfort, and comfort is powerful. Organizations, societies, and social groups all rely on stable hierarchies. First impressions help lock those hierarchies in place. They tell everyone where to stand without having to renegotiate every interaction. This is why change is so difficult once a role is assigned. It threatens not just the individual's image, but the system's balance. Most people do not fail because they lack intelligence, creativity, or discipline. They fail because they were categorized too early and spent the rest of their lives performing inside a box they did not choose. The tragedy is not that first impressions exist. It is that they are rarely questioned to control the first impression, and you shape the ceiling of what others believe is possible for you. Fail to do so, and you may spend years proving something that could have been assumed in seconds. Once the door closes, it rarely reopens. Respect is born at the intersection of trust and uncertainty. Too much of one destroys the other. Human beings are comforted by consistency. We want to know what someone stands for, what lines they will not cross, what values anchor their decisions. Stability reduces anxiety. It allows us to predict the moral terrain we are walking on, but predictability of action is something else entirely. Machiavelli observed that rulers who were fully transparent in their intentions were quickly outmaneuvered. When every move can be anticipated, opposition does not need strength, only patience. Predictability invites manipulation because it removes risk. It turns strategy into scheduling at the same time. Leaders who acted erratically without moral grounding triggered fear and rebellion. Chaos without principle feels dangerous, not authoritative. People will tolerate uncertainty only when they believe it serves a larger order. This is the balance Machiavelli understood with unsettling clarity. Be predictable in what you believe, unpredictable in how you act. Throughout history, effective authority figures maintained a clear moral image while keeping their tactical decisions obscured. Their enemies knew what they valued, but never how far they were willing to go or when they would strike. This ambiguity created hesitation, and hesitation creates respect. Psychologically, uncertainty elevates attention. The mind becomes alert, cautious, watchful. But when uncertainty is anchored to stable values, it does not become panic. It becomes deference. We see this dynamic everywhere. In negotiations, the party who reveals their bottom line loses leverage instantly. In leadership, the manager who announces every future decision invites resistance before action even begins. In personal boundaries, Those who over-explain their limits teach others exactly how far they can be pushed. Transparency feels virtuous, but it often erodes authority. Modern culture praises openness without acknowledging its strategic cost. To reveal intentions too early is to surrender initiative. It allows others to plan around you, rather than respond to you. Machiavelli warned against this long before modern psychology gave it language. He understood that power operates in shadows as much as in light, not because darkness is evil, but because visibility creates vulnerability. Uncertainty forces others to respect your agency. They cannot assume. They cannot predict. They must wait. This does not mean deception for its own sake. It means restraint. It means allowing your actions to speak before your intentions are dissected and diluted. People who command respect often seem simple on the surface. Their values are clear. Their boundaries are firm. But their decisions feel sudden, decisive, and difficult to anticipate. This combination creates a quiet authority. Others hesitate before testing it. Predictable values build trust. Unpredictable action preserves power. Remove either, and the structure collapses. A leader who is morally opaque but tactically predictable becomes feared, then overthrown. A leader who is morally clear but tactically transparent becomes admired, then exploited. The danger lies in confusing honesty with exposure. Transparency without strategy is not integrity. It is self-sabotage in a world that watches, measures, and anticipates every move. Those who reveal everything lose the ability to surprise. And without surprise, there is no leverage. Respect lives in the space between knowing who someone is to never being entirely sure what they will do next. In an age of endless commentary, silence has become suspicious. We are taught that to remain silent is to forfeit control of the narrative. That explanation is safety. That clarity is power. And so we speak constantly. We justify. We clarify. We respond. We fill every gap with words, afraid that if we don't, someone else will. Machiavelli saw the danger in this centuries ago. He noticed that rulers who spoke too freely lost something intangible but essential: mystique. Their authority became familiar, accessible, predictable. And familiarity, over time, erodes. Silence does the opposite. Silence creates space. And into that space, people project meaning. When a powerful figure remains silent, observers do the work for them. They speculate. They interpret. They imagine depth, calculation, restraint. Silence forces others to lean in rather than tune out. It shifts effort away from the speaker and onto the audience. Psychologically, this is profound. The human mind is uncomfortable with gaps. When information is withheld, the brain fills it often, exaggerating what is absent. Silence becomes an amplifier, not a void. Over-explaining, by contrast, signals anxiety. It reveals a fear of being misunderstood, challenged, or rejected. The more someone explains, the more they invite scrutiny. Every added word becomes a thread that can be pulled. This is why leaders who rush to justify decisions appear uncertain, even when they are correct. Why public figures who respond to every criticism seem shaken by them. Why people who talk endlessly about their competence rarely convince anyone in everyday life. Silence quietly rearranges power. In a conversation, the person who speaks last often frames the outcome. In a disagreement, the one who pauses instead of reacting creates imbalance. The other begins to wonder what is being calculated. Silence slows momentum. It introduces uncertainty. And uncertainty commands attention. This is not about manipulation through coldness. It is about restraint. Machiavelli understood that explanation is often offered not to enlighten others, but to soothe oneself, to relieve the discomfort of ambiguity. But power is comfortable with ambiguity. Power does not rush to resolve tension, it uses it. Those who command respect do not feel compelled to narrate themselves. They do not preemptively defend their position. They allow their presence, decisions, and boundaries to speak. Modern culture confuses visibility with authority. But visibility without control leads to dilution. When everything is said, nothing resonates. Silence, when intentional, signals that one's position does not require constant reinforcement. That approval is not being sought. That explanation is optional. This is why silence can feel intimidating. It removes the emotional handrails. It denies easy access. It forces others to confront their own assumptions rather than being guided through them. The question is not whether you can speak, but why you do. How often are words used to express strength? And how often are they used to compensate for its absence? In a world that never stops talking, the most powerful statement is often the one that is withheld. Power does not fear morality. It fears replacement. Machiavelli understood this with brutal clarity. Those who rise too brightly beneath authority draw attention they cannot survive. History is crowded with talented subordinates who mistook excellence for immunity, who believed contribution would be rewarded rather than perceived as competition. They were wrong. To outshine power is to threaten identity. And insecure power retaliates not because it is evil, but because it is afraid. Status is not just a position. It is a fragile psychological construction that must be defended at all costs. When someone below appears more capable, more admired, or more indispensable, the hierarchy trembles. This is why courts were filled with betrayals. Generals who won too many victories were quietly removed. Advisors whose influence eclipsed their rulers were exiled or executed. The lesson was never spoken, but always enforced. Brilliance without restraint is dangerous, yet the opposite extreme is equally fatal. Those who appear harmless invite exploitation. Weakness attracts control the way blood attracts predators. When someone is perceived as unable to resist, they become a resource used, managed, and discarded when no longer useful. Machiavelli warned that power respects resistance, not submission. A subordinate who never pushes back becomes invisible. Their boundaries dissolve. Their value is extracted until nothing remains. Psychologically, this creates a cruel paradox. To survive hierarchy, one must neither threaten nor submit. One must signal strength without provocation, capability without challenge, presence without dominance. This is not cowardice. It is calibration. Modern organizations operate no differently than Renaissance courts. The employee who openly competes with leadership is sidelined. The one who never asserts themselves is overworked and undercredited. Both are punished, just in different ways. The reason is psychological. It's not moral. Those at the top are constantly scanning for threats below and vulnerabilities above. They protect their position by neutralizing both. Ambition is tolerated only when it is controlled. Compliance is accepted only when it is limited. So how does one survive? By mastering the art of implied strength. Those who command respect within hierarchies demonstrate competence without spectacle. They choose moments carefully. They allow superiors to save face. They do not expose weakness, but neither do they flaunt superiority. Their power is felt, not displayed. This creates a strange effect. They are not feared as rivals, but they are not dismissed as tools. They become necessary, but not destabilizing. Useful, but not expendable. Machiavelli understood that respect in such systems is not seized through confrontation. It is cultivated through positioning. You do not challenge power head-on unless you are prepared to replace it. And you do not shrink yourself into irrelevance unless you are prepared to be consumed. The existential tension of hierarchy is this: The system is designed to crush both threats and liabilities. Survival belongs to those who learn to exist in between. Respect, then, is not about rebellion or obedience. It is about strategic visibility to be seen as capable, but not dangerous. Strong, but not destabilizing. Independent, but not insubordinate. This balance is uncomfortable because it requires restraint. It requires patience. It requires an understanding that power is not impressed by noise. But it does notice pressure. Those who survive long enough to matter learn this truth. Quietly. Respect is not won by outshining power. It is earned by knowing exactly how brightly to shine. Respect rarely comes from admiration alone. It comes from necessity. Machiavelli understood that power does not rest on goodwill, but on dependence. Those who are needed are protected. Those who are optional are disposable. This is not cynicism, it is structured throughout history. Rulers surrounded themselves not with the most virtuous, but with the most useful. Advisors who controlled information, generals who controlled armies, financiers who controlled resources. Their influence did not come from force, but from being irreplaceable. To remove them would destabilize the system itself. This is the hidden currency of respect. Controlled usefulness. Dependency is often misunderstood as weakness. But there is a crucial difference between needing someone and submitting to them. Power flows toward the one who fulfills a function others cannot easily replicate. Machiavelli warned that generosity without leverage leads to exploitation. Those who give freely without limit train others to expect, not respect. But those who provide selectively, who become a necessary bridge rather than an open hand, quietly accumulate influence in the modern world. This dynamic is everywhere. The employee who becomes the sole holder of critical knowledge gains protection without demanding it. The individual who remains emotionally grounded in chaotic environments becomes a stabilizing force others rely on. The person who controls access to information, opportunity, or network shapes outcomes without issuing orders. None of this requires domination. It requires positioning. Psychologically, dependency changes behavior. People are more cautious with those they rely on. They tolerate flaws. They overlook missteps. They seek to preserve the relationship because the cost of loss feels too high. This is why irreplaceability commands respect more reliably than likability. Yet here the tone darkens, because dependency is rarely accidental. It is often engineered. Systems are designed to create reliance. Corporations lock users into ecosystems. Institutions centralize expertise. Leaders discourage redundancy. Not because efficiency demands it, but because dependency ensures compliance. Machiavelli saw this clearly. He advised rulers to structure power so that loyalty became necessary, not optional. When people cannot imagine functioning without you, opposition weakens. But there is a moral tension here. To create dependency is to shape another person's freedom. And so the question becomes unavoidable. Is independence truly power? Complete independence sounds noble, but it isolates. It removes leverage. It places you outside systems that protect their own. Independence may offer dignity, but it rarely offers security. Interdependence, on the other hand, creates entanglement, mutual reliance, shared risk. And within those bonds, influence grows. The danger is excess. Dependency can curdle into control. Usefulness can become manipulation. And once others realize their reliance has been weaponized, resentment follows. Machiavelli did not romanticize this. He simply acknowledged it. Respect emerges not from being needed by everyone, but from being needed where it matters. The uncomfortable truth is this: the world does not revolve around fairness. It revolves around function. Those who fulfill critical roles shape outcomes even silently. The question is not whether dependency exists. It always does. The question is whether you understand where you stand within it. Is freedom found in standing alone, or in becoming impossible to remove? Few ideas associated with Machiavelli provoke as much discomfort as this one. It is often reduced to a crude slogan that it is better to be feared than loved. But stripped of context, this insight becomes something it was never meant to be. Machiavelli was not praising cruelty. He was diagnosing instability. Affection is fragile. It depends on mood, circumstance, and benefit. It thrives in comfort and evaporates under pressure. Fear, by contrast, is durable not because it is violent, but because it is predictable. This distinction matters. Fear, in Machiavelli's sense, is not terror. It is the clear understanding that actions have consequences. It is the certainty that boundaries will be enforced. It is the knowledge that crossing a line will reliably produce a response. Fear stabilizes behavior because it removes ambiguity. Affection does the opposite. Love is generous, but inconsistent. It forgives repeatedly, often without limit. And in doing so, it teaches others that boundaries are negotiable. Psychologically, humans adapt quickly to kindness. What begins as generosity becomes expectation. What begins as patience becomes entitlement. Over time, affection loses its leverage. Fear does not. History reveals this pattern relentlessly. Leaders celebrated for their warmth often crumble when faced with crisis. Their supporters scatter. Their authority dissolves. Not because they were wrong, but because love did not bind when sacrifice was required by contrast. Leaders known for firmness endure storms that would destroy more beloved figures. Their followers may resent them, but they obey. They comply not out of admiration, but out of respect for consequence. This is not a moral endorsement. It is an observation modern life reflects the same truth in quieter ways. The manager who wants to be liked avoids difficult decisions and slowly loses control. The parent who never enforces rules becomes ignored. The public figure who seeks universal approval is eventually devoured by the very crowd. They tried to please. Affection fluctuates. Fear stabilizes. This is because fear engages a deeper layer of the brain. It does not require agreement. It does not require admiration. It requires only belief in inevitability. Machiavelli understood that power depends on reliability. People can tolerate harshness if it is consistent. What they cannot tolerate is unpredictability without consequence. When rules exist but are not enforced, chaos follows. Fear, properly understood, is structure. It tells people where the edges are. It defines limits. It removes guesswork. And in doing so, it creates a strange form of safety. People may dislike the boundary, but they feel grounded by its existence. Affection offers warmth, but no guarantees. This is why respect rooted in boundaries outlasts respect rooted in charm. Charm fades. Circumstances change. Loyalties shift. But the memory of consequence lingers. The chilling realization is this: when pressure arrives, affection is the first thing to collapse. In moments of scarcity, crisis, or fear, people do not ask who was kind. They ask who is strong, who is decisive, who will act. Machiavelli did not argue that leaders should be hated. He argued that they should not depend on love to survive. Because love is voluntary. Fear is not, and when systems strain, when comfort disappears, when stakes rise. Voluntary loyalty dissolves quickly. Respect, built on predictable consequence, endures longer. Love may open the door, but fear keeps it standing. And when the world turns hostile, as it inevitably does, what remains is not who is adored, but who is taken seriously. Respect fades faster than fear when pressure arrives. Asterisk. Virtue is a language. And like any language, it can be spoken fluently, even when the speaker does not fully believe the words. Machiavelli recognized this long before the term public image entered our modern vocabulary. To command respect, one must appear virtuous, not necessarily because virtue ensures survival, but because its appearance shapes perception. The paradox is simple yet unsettling. Those who act purely on principle may be admired privately, but publicly, they are vulnerable. The world does not always reward ethical consistency. It rewards the impression of integrity, because perception drives behavior more reliably than morality. This is where understanding vice becomes critical. Machiavelli was not advocating immorality. He was advocating literacy in human nature. Leaders who fail to recognize the darker impulses of those around them are blindsided. They expect loyalty where instinct demands self-interest. They expect honesty where deception thrives. They are undone not by evil itself, but by ignorance of it. History is full of examples. Advisors who trusted blindly, generals who misjudged ambition, rulers who overestimated goodness all suffered catastrophic consequences. Those who survived were rarely saints. They were observers. They understood the tools of vice, even as they cloaked themselves in the garments of virtue. Modern life mirrors this dynamic in subtle ways. Public figures curate personas carefully, projecting empathy, fairness, and accountability. Brands cultivate images of ethical responsibility. Politicians signal morality while navigating arenas of compromise and negotiation. Often, the image of virtue matters more than its substance because perception governs engagement, loyalty, and compliance. This is not an argument for hypocrisy, but for strategic awareness. To navigate complex social ecosystems, one must balance the projection of virtue with a clear-eyed understanding of human flaws both in oneself and others. Moral theater, when executed with precision, creates trust, commands authority, and stabilizes influence. Yet there is a danger. Moral purity, when rigidly pursued, can blind. Idealists who refuse to acknowledge vice even, when only as a concept, are ill-equipped to respond to manipulation, ambition, or betrayal. They mistake ethical clarity for operational security. In doing so, they surrender leverage to those who understand both light and shadow. The uncomfortable truth emerges. Appearing virtuous protects far more effectively than pure virtue itself. Understanding vice ensures survival, strategy, and influence even when actions remain unseen. Those who combine both the projection of integrity with mastery of human complexity command respect without inviting unnecessary challenge. Machiavelli's insight is chilling in its practicality. Ethics for him was as much a performance as a discipline, to navigate a world of shifting loyalties, hidden agendas, and unpredictable consequences. One must speak the language of morality fluently while keeping the tools of reality in hand. The lesson is stark. Virtue alone does not shield you. Awareness of vice does not corrupt you. And those who fail to master both are often the first to fall. Respect is earned, not through purity, but through the delicate balance of appearance, knowledge, and strategic perception. Power is as much a story as it is a position. And those who control the story control the perception of reality. Machiavelli understood that the narrative surrounding a person, how others interpret their decisions, their motives, their successes and failures, is often more consequential than the actions themselves. History judges outcomes, but it also judges context. Those who shape context shape memory. Controlling the narrative begins with awareness. Every word spoken, every gesture made, every public act contributes to a larger story. Leaders who fail to shape that story find themselves defined by others. Allies reinterpret intentions, rivals exploit ambiguity, and the audience, whether a populace, a workforce, or a social circle, consumes the narrative uncritically. Silence without strategy, openness without framing. honesty without discretion each can be a subtle surrender of authority. But narrative is only part of the equation. Time itself is a tool of power. Those who understand when to act, when to pause, when to escalate, and when to retreat wield an influence that appears effortless. Acting too soon exposes vulnerability. Acting too late invites irrelevance. Mastery of timing transforms competence into inevitability. It turns skill into perception. It turns presence into authority. History is littered with those who acted at the wrong moment. Generals who struck prematurely were defeated despite superior forces. Innovators who revealed breakthroughs too early were overshadowed by imitators. Leaders who waited too long saw opportunities vanish, while rivals shaped the world in their stead. Timing is not mere patience. It is strategic anticipation, an intimate understanding of rhythm, context, and consequence. Finally, there is the art of exit. Few mistakes erode respect faster than overstaying one's authority. Power is transient. Influence decays. Even the most brilliant figures risk tarnishing their legacy if they linger beyond relevance. Those who depart strategically at the peak of perception, before decline becomes visible, transform impermanence into legend. Leaving does not imply surrender. It implies control. It signals that one has mastered circumstances rather than being mastered by them. Machiavelli's deepest insight emerges in these three rules. Control your narrative, master timing, and know when to leave. Power is rarely seized in a single decisive act. It is maintained through a series of calculated impressions, perfectly timed interventions, and exits that preserve reputation. Authority is temporal, but perception is enduring. Those who understand the interplay between story, time, and presence create legacies that outlast their tenure. Modern parallels are everywhere. Corporate executives shape quarterly narratives to preserve stock confidence. Public figures manage scandals by controlling the framing and timing of disclosures. Artists cultivate mystique by carefully pacing their visibility. In all cases, success is not defined by absolute control, but by selective influence. What is revealed, when, and for how long. These final rules converge in a single principle. Authority is ephemeral, but perception is cumulative. Every decision contributes to a lasting impression. Every pause shapes expectation. Every departure cements legacy. Even the most formidable positions decay. Yet the memory of influence can persist indefinitely if navigated with strategic foresight. Respect, once earned, can be lost through mismanagement of story, mistiming, or overstaying. But those who master narrative, time, and exit transform transient authority into enduring resonance. Power is never permanent. Control over perception, however, can be. And therein lies Machiavelli's final, chilling lesson: legacies endure not because they resist decay, but because they are orchestrated to outlast it. Knowledge is a double-edged sword. To understand the unspoken rules of respect is to step into a world few willingly explore. A world where clarity brings control, but also solitude. Those who see the mechanics of influence, hierarchy, and perception are granted power, but not comfort. Awareness sharpens decisions, yet it dulls innocence. Every interaction is filtered, every gesture measured, every alliance weighed. The simple pleasures of trust, of unguarded connection, become fraught with risk. To know these rules is to understand that the world is neither fair nor just. People do not grant respect out of virtue. Authority is earned, maintained, and sometimes stolen. Every relationship contains leverage. Every favor contains expectation. Every compliment contains calculus. Once you perceive these dynamics, you cannot unsee them. Social interactions are no longer casual, they are strategic. History is instructive, but merciless. Generals who mastered tactics alone often fell to betrayal. Statesmen who wielded influence without perception frequently discovered that loyalty is transactional. Those who survive in the corridors of power do so not by kindness, but by mastering calculation, timing, and human psychology. And yet, mastery isolates. Allies are wary, rivals are vigilant, and trust becomes a currency too costly to spend freely. In modern life, the cost is quieter, but no less real. Awareness of manipulation makes you vigilant in every meeting, every negotiation, every social interaction. You see ambition, envy, and strategic calculation lurking behind smiles and pleasantries. You understand that dependency, perception, and timing are tools and, sometimes, weapons. You gain the ability to shape outcomes, but you also bear the burden of constant evaluation. The world becomes a chessboard, and you are always both player and target. This is the paradox. Power through understanding comes with loneliness. The more you see, the less you can surrender to comfort. The more control you wield, the more vigilance it demands. The mind that navigates influence with clarity rarely rests in ease. Awareness isolates because most of the world operates in ignorance, trusting emotions, narratives, and assumptions that you can no longer afford. To see the threads of manipulation is to recognize how often others are complicit in their own subjugation, and how often you must act to protect yourself. Yet this knowledge is also liberation. Understanding the unspoken rules allows you to navigate relationships, hierarchies, and opportunities with foresight. It allows you to command respect without relying on approval. It allows you to maintain authority where others fail, to survive where others are exposed, to leave before decline erases legacy. But it comes at a cost. The freedom to act is inseparable from the burden of seeing clearly. Every decision carries weight, every interaction potential consequence. And so the question remains, haunting and inescapable. Now that you understand how respect truly works, what will you do with this knowledge? Will you wield it deliberately, shaping outcomes with calculated restraint? Or will the rules, invisible yet omnipresent, shape you instead, bending your choices without your consent? Awareness grants control, but it also exposes the soul to the stark reality of human ambition, fear, and desire. Innocence offers comfort, but ignorance leaves one vulnerable. There is no simple path. There is only choice. The price of knowing these rules is not failure or success, is the weight of perception itself. You cannot unlearn what you now see. And in seeing it, you confront a profound truth. Respect is not given. It is orchestrated. It is earned, maintained, and defended in ways few acknowledge openly. The world will never seem the same again. And in that understanding lies both power and solitude. Asterisk,